Okay, so I'm going to talk to you tonight quite briefly, actually. I've probably got about 10 minutes to talk in total about being positive, and thank you very much to everyone who's come tonight. It's nice to see such a nice, good turnout. So I don't think any of us would struggle to think of a negative news story from 2016, but there have also been lots of positive news stories in the past year, and I've just picked one because of the time, and I've picked my favourite HIV related news story that is positive from the past year. Okay, I'm going to start with some revision to test if you were paying attention at the talk I gave last year. Okay, so this is just a reminder, we always float the term viral load around everywhere, and just a reminder of what we're on about when we talk about viral load. All we mean is we take 1 ml of blood and send it to the lab, and in every ml of blood we count the number of virus particles in 1 ml of blood, and that number is the viral load. Okay, and that's all it means. So you'll hear us saying viral load this, viral load that, CD4 count this, CD4 count that. And if you want to know more about that, Helen Webb, our sister, has also done a talk which is up on our website last year explaining your blood tests, and if you want to know about that in detail. And I'm not going to talk about HIV transmission in detail, but most people in the UK who have HIV acquired HIV sexually, and it can only be transmitted from 5 bodily fluids. Okay, and this is a thought experiment I did last year, and I'm not expecting an answer. But the experiment is this man is going to have sex once with each of these 100 women, and the question I'm asking is how many of these 100 women will get pregnant. And when I ask this question, there are lots of possible amusing answers, but the right answer is going to depend. It's going to depend how old these women are. It's going to depend, are they all on contraception? Are they already pregnant? And you can't really give me an answer. No one can give me an answer. And if we do the same question about HIV, it's exactly the same answer. So this man is HIV positive, and he's going to have sex with 100 women who are HIV negative. How many will get HIV? And the answer to this question is exactly the same as the answer to the last one, is that it depends. And it depends on lots of different factors. And I'm not going to discuss this in detail today because we covered it in the last talk, which is up on the seminar, which is up on the patient website. But there are lots of different factors that determine whether HIV is transmitted, and they all combine together to give you a probability, and they range from luck to genetics to whether you used a condom. But I'm just going to remind you of what the top 3 factors are that determine whether somebody will transmit HIV or catch HIV. And those are, number 1 is viral load, number 2 is viral load, and number 3 is viral load. So viral load is the most important factor which will determine whether HIV is transmitted, and all the other things are slightly less important. If somebody has a high viral load, then they are very likely to transmit HIV sexually. If someone has an undetectable viral load or a very low viral load, then they are very unlikely to transmit HIV sexually, even if you factor in all the other things on the previous slide. And people tend to have a high viral load when they're newly infected, around the time they've just become infected because the body hasn't got the virus under control. And if they're also very sick and they have had untreated infection for many years. And most people on treatment should have an undetectable or a very low viral load, hopefully, if they're taking it properly. Okay, so a viral load of 10,000 copies per mil, that would actually class as a low viral load, because the virus is so small that in 1 ml of blood, if you have 10,000 viruses, that's actually classed as a low viral load. And we start talking about high viral loads in terms of choosing medications and things when we reach 100,000 or more. And hopefully most of you who come to clinic will have an undetectable viral load, which means that in each ml of blood we have fewer than 40 virus particles. And that means that your viral load is undetectable. And that's what we aim for, and that's what we expect in all our patients who are taking treatment. Okay. So I'm going to go back to what I was going to talk about today and ask this question: is if my viral load is undetectable, can I pass on HIV? So, same experiment again, and this young man is undetectable. He's on HIV treatment and he's taking it properly. And he's going to have sex with 100 women, and he's decided not to use condoms because he doesn't like using condoms. So my question to the audience is, how many will get HIV? And you're not allowed to say it depends. Okay. So I often ask this to some of my patients, especially the younger ones who maybe grew up with HIV and haven't yet started having sex. And I get lots of different answers. Some people say 0, some people say all of them will get HIV, some people say 80%. And especially the younger ones often say, yeah, I'll pass on the HIV and I'm going to go to jail as well for not using a condom. So that's what people often see themselves as. People often overestimate, in my experience, how infectious they are. Okay, so what is the real answer? So we have some studies for the real world. We can't do the experiment with the man, unfortunately, because we wouldn't be granted ethical approval. So 2 studies I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about the next one that was published in 2016. This is a massive study called the HIV Prevention Trials Network Study, or HPTN 052 study, and it's very famous. And it's a study that took place in 9 countries. So most of these countries were in sub-Saharan Africa, but there were also some patients in the USA. And most of the patients in the study were heterosexual, and they got 1,763 couples where one partner was positive and one partner was negative, and they followed them up for 10 years. Okay. Now, when the study was done, they gave them all condoms and told them all to use condoms all the time. And they compared those who had been on treatments to those who were not taking treatment. And they followed these couples up over 10 years, and these couples were having sex regularly over 10 years. Now, although they were officially told to use condoms, we know that that doesn't always happen in real life, and certainly over 10 years, many people don't use condoms. And they only saw 8 transmissions of HIV from one partner to another in the 10-year period. And 4 of those HIV transmissions happened in patients who had just started treatment, but their viral load hadn't gone down yet, hadn't had time to go down. In one patient, it had happened on the first day of treatment. And 4 of those had taken place in patients who'd started treatment and then stopped, and their viral load had gone up again. So we would call that virological failure. But they saw 0 transmissions in patients who were taking their treatment regularly with an undetectable viral load. Okay? So all the transmissions they saw were in people who had either not been on medication long enough to become undetectable, or who had stopped taking their medication after they'd become undetectable. Now, the problem with this study is, although we know people are not always very good with condoms, there were lots of condoms used, so we don't know how much of that is the condoms and how much of that is the viral load. The other thing we know about this study is most of the patients in this study were heterosexual. And we know that anal sex is very different from vaginal sex, and there's a much higher risk of HIV transmission with anal sex. So that doesn't really answer our question. If somebody has an undetectable viral load, what's the risk of passing it on? Because the trial included condoms, and it didn't really include any people having anal sex. So it didn't give us that answer. So this is another study, and this study is still ongoing in a number of clinics across Europe and several clinics in London. This is an example of the kind of study we would do here at the Courtyard Clinic. So if you see any posters in the waiting room inviting you to participate in a study, this is the kind of study we would be taking part in. So I'm just going to talk about the initial results, which were published in 2016. So they chose 1,166 couples who volunteered to join the study. And these were couples where one partner was negative and the other partner was HIV positive. But these were couples who were choosing not to use condoms. So they didn't go for people who were having sex with condoms, like the other study. All of these couples were having sex and they were choosing not to use condoms. And a big proportion of those in the study were gay couples as well. So 38% of couples in the study were gay. So that was designed to look at anal sex, and all the positive partners were undetectable in the study. So we weren't looking at people who'd stopped their treatment or people who hadn't yet become undetectable. We were just looking at people who were undetectable. So undetectable and not using condoms, and the negative partners were not using PEP or PrEP. Okay, because again, that could skew the results. So it's as good a design as you'll get, really, without doing a very unethical experiment to see what the rate of transmission is in somebody who's HIV undetectable, not using condoms. They followed these couples up for 2 years, and they are still following them up now. So we should get more results from this study in the next couple of years. And I love this infographic because it summarises the findings of the study. It's called the Partner Study, by the way. So it's from Terence Higgins Trust, which I've borrowed. So the study took place across 14 European countries, 1,166 couples, where one was negative, one was positive, and no condoms. And they got these poor couples to fill in very detailed sex diaries of how often they'd had sex, and whether they'd used a condom and what type of sex they'd had, whether they'd had vaginal sex, oral sex, anal sex. And in total, they calculated that these couples had had 58,000 episodes of sex without condoms. And they saw 0 transmissions for HIV in this study. So that was my good news story of the year, I think. Okay. Now, why is the study still ongoing? I think there's enough evidence now to suggest that for heterosexual sex, the risk is 0 or virtually 0. We can never prove anything is 0. I can never prove that I'm not going to be struck by a meteorite in the next 10 minutes, but it's unlikely. So I think for heterosexual sex, we have enough data now to suggest that even sex without condoms, if the positive partner is undetectable, that the risk of transmission is 0. But there were small numbers of partners who were HIV negative who were choosing to have passive anal sex with ejaculation, which is the highest risk of sex for getting HIV. There were 217, and they followed them up for a year. So they saw 0 transmissions, but to get a better idea of exactly what the risk is and to be more certain for that particular kind of sex, the study's going to follow up the gay couples only for a longer time period, and hopes to publish the results of that soon. I think the other thing to bear in mind is we don't have any data for very traumatic sex, and I think it's going to be difficult to get that. So there are some caveats, but certainly for heterosexual sex, I think that the jury is now no longer out. So the Swiss were right when they said in 2008 that in the context of an undetectable viral load, HIV is not transmissible. Okay, so this is my final slide. I've found the results of the partner study being very well received by all my patients who I've discussed it with. But looking at the bigger picture, it is not just about transmitting HIV. There are lots of other factors that come together to make up people's sexual well-being and general well-being and living with HIV, starting from disclosing to partners and telling partners their diagnosis, and dealings with feelings about the diagnosis. So I'm just going to give our website a plug, which has a series of talks talking about things really from happiness and emotional well-being to how to tell other people how to get the best from your clinic. And there's a list of seminars from last year also available on the website. We've heard already about some fantastic support groups that are going on, and I'd encourage everybody to access support groups because it makes a huge difference to people's well-being. It's not just about transmitting the virus or not transmitting the virus. So thank you to everybody who runs those. Okay. We have some very good resources online, so if you want to keep up to date with what's going on in research, there's lots of very promising research. I probably chose the study that affects most of my patients the most, but there's been promising research on several areas from breastfeeding to pregnancy. So if you want to keep up to date with all the studies going on, I'd strongly recommend the NAM website, and you can access that using our clinic login. Okay, so thank you very much for listening, and I'm going to have a few minutes for questions.